HOA president thought she ruled the neighborhood with absolute power. When a judge refused to remove his vegetable garden, her rage erupted into 3 deadly gunshots. But the wounded judge survived. And when she faced him in court hours later, justice struck back harder than any bullet could. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Maple Street looked like a picture from a magazine. White picket fences lined the sidewalks. Children played while parents watched from porches. Every lawn was perfectly trimmed. It was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed about. Judge William Carter had lived there for 15 years. He was 52 years old with gray hair and kind eyes. People respected him because he was fair and honest. At home, he was a devoted husband to Sarah and a loving father to 13-year-old Emma and 11-year-old Jake. But there was one person who did not like Judge Carter. Her name was Karen Mitchell, the president of the Homeowners Association. Karen was 50 years old, tall and thin with short blonde hair. She wore expensive designer clothes and walked like royalty. For 7 years, she had ruled Maple Street with an iron fist. She made rules about everything: house colors, grass height, holiday decorations, even garden gnomes. Most neighbors feared Karen. She sent violation notices for the smallest problems. If your trash can was visible from the street, you got a letter. If a weed grew in your flower bed, you got a fine. Nobody dared to challenge her until Judge Carter planted his vegetable garden. It started as a simple family project. Emma loved tomatoes and Jake was fascinated by carrots. One Saturday morning in April, the Carter family worked together in their backyard, planting seeds and laughing. Judge Carter had checked the HOA rules carefully. There was nothing that prohibited vegetable gardens. The garden was neat, well-maintained, and not visible from the street. But Karen Mitchell was furious when she discovered it during one of her neighborhood inspections. A vegetable garden in her premium neighborhood. This was unacceptable. She immediately typed an angry letter on official HOA letterhead. You are required to remove this garden within 14 days or face fines of $100 per day. Judge Carter read the letter carefully and reviewed the HOA rules again. Finding no prohibition against vegetable gardens, he wrote a polite response, declining to remove it. Karen was livid. How dare he question her authority? She called an emergency HOA board meeting, but the other members refused to support her. 3 members voted against creating a new rule banning vegetables. For the first time in 7 years, the board had defied her. Karen felt humiliated, and it was all because of Judge Carter. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen's behavior became increasingly aggressive. She drove past the Carter house multiple times each day, staring at the backyard with hatred. She sent angry letters almost daily. She started a petition that neighbors refused to sign. Karen began following the Carter family to the store, to school, to church. She left nasty notes on their car. Other neighbors started noticing her strange behavior. I'm worried about Karen, Mrs. Johnson told her neighbor Tom. She seems obsessed. It's not healthy. The breaking point came when Karen called Judge Carter's workplace. She demanded to speak with his supervisor about his illegal garden. The chief judge politely explained this was a private dispute and hung up. When Judge Carter learned about the call, he phoned Karen to arrange a meeting. We're neighbors. We should work this out peacefully. Remove that garden or face the consequences. Karen screamed and hung up. That night, Karen went to her closet and pulled out a small handgun her father had given her. Her hands shook as she loaded it. He thinks being a judge makes him better than me, she muttered. I'll show him what happens when you cross Karen Mitchell. The next morning was beautiful and clear. At 9 o'clock, Judge Carter was in his backyard with Emma and Jake, teaching them how to tie up tomato plants. Sarah was inside making breakfast. Karen had been standing at her bedroom window for an hour, watching them and working up courage. The gun felt heavy in her jacket pocket. At 9:30 a.m., she walked out of her house and marched across the street. Her heart pounded, but her mind was made up. Judge Carter looked up when he heard footsteps. Good morning, Mrs. Mitchell. Beautiful day, isn't it? Karen didn't answer. Something in her expression made Judge Carter nervous. 20 years as a judge had taught him to read people. "Kids, go inside and help Mom," he said gently. Emma and Jake ran toward the house, but stopped at the back door to watch. Karen pulled the gun from her pocket and pointed it at Judge Carter. Her hands shook and her eyes were wild. "You should have listened to me," she screamed. "You should have respected my authority." Judge Carter raised his hands slowly. "Mrs. Mitchell, please put the gun down. Let's talk about this." "It's too late for talking," Karen yelled. "You humiliated me. You made me look weak. That was never my intention. I just wanted to grow vegetables for my family." Several neighbors who were working in their yard saw what was happening. Mrs. Johnson gasped and dropped her bird seed. Tom shut off his lawn mower and stared in horror. "You should have removed the garden," Karen said quietly. She pulled the trigger. The first bullet hit Judge Carter in the left shoulder. The impact spun him around and knocked him to the ground. Pain exploded through his body. Emma and Jake screamed. Sarah ran out of the house, shrieking her husband's name. Judge Carter lay on the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Karen, stop. Please think of my children." But Karen wasn't done. She aimed at his chest and fired again. The second bullet grazed Judge Carter's ribs, tearing through skin and muscle. He cried out and rolled to his left. Sarah threw herself over her husband's body. "Don't shoot. Please don't shoot." Tom ran toward Karen from his yard. "Karen, stop. What are you doing?" Karen fired the third shot. It hit Sarah in the arm. She screamed and fell to the side. Now both Judge and Sarah Carter lay bleeding on the grass where they had planted vegetables just weeks before. Tom tackled Karen from behind and twisted her wrist until she dropped the gun. Karen didn't fight. The rage had drained out of her, leaving only emptiness. In the distance, sirens wailed. 3 ambulances and 6 police cars arrived within minutes. Paramedics rushed to Judge Carter and Sarah, checking vital signs and bandaging wounds. "We need to get them to the hospital now," the lead paramedic said. "The shoulder wound is serious." They loaded the Carters into separate ambulances. Emma and Jake rode with their mother, crying and terrified. Police officers handcuffed Karen and led her to a patrol car. She sat on the curb, staring at her hands, unable to comprehend what she had done. A detective read her rights. "Karen Mitchell, you are under arrest for attempted murder." At County General Hospital, surgeons worked on Judge Carter for 3 hours. The bullet in his shoulder had shattered bone and torn through muscle. Sarah's injury was less serious, but she would need physical therapy. While Judge Carter was in surgery, Karen sat in an interrogation room at the police station. Detective Rodriguez questioned her. "Tell me what happened this morning." "I shot him," Karen said flatly. "Why?" "He wouldn't remove his vegetable garden. He defied my authority." Rodriguez blinked. "You shot a judge because of a vegetable garden." "I was so angry. For weeks, all I could think about was that garden. Consumed me. I loaded the gun last night. I waited for him to be in the garden with his children. You realize you shot him in front of his kids." Tears filled Karen's eyes. "I wasn't thinking about them. I was only thinking about him, about how he had humiliated me." Karen called her attorney, Harold Chin, who rushed to the station. "Don't say anything more," Chin warned. But the damage was done. Karen had already confessed to premeditated attempted murder. What happened next was extraordinary and unprecedented. Judge Martinez, the chief judge, convened an emergency court session that very afternoon. "Given the severity of the crime and the public safety risk, we will proceed with arraignment immediately," Judge Martinez announced. At 2 p.m., just 4.5 hours after the shooting, Karen Mitchell stood before Judge Martinez in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. The courtroom was packed with neighbors from Maple Street and news reporters. Harold Chin stood beside his client, still reeling from how quickly events were moving. "Karen Mitchell, you are charged with 3 counts of attempted murder in the first degree." Judge Martinez read. "How do you plead?" "Not guilty," Chun said on behalf of his client. Judge Martinez's expression was stern. "Bail is set at $5 million. The defendant will remain in custody." "Your Honor," Chin protested. My client has no criminal record. She has deep ties to the community. Your client shot 3 people this morning, Mr. Chun. One of them is a respected judge in this courthouse. She did it in front of children. She fired 3 shots at unarmed people. She will remain in custody. The judge banged his gavel. As guards led Karen away, she looked back at the packed courtroom. The neighbors who had once feared her authority now stared at her with disgust and anger. Her life as she knew it was over. Judge Carter woke up in the ICU that evening. His shoulder was heavily bandaged and immobilized. Sarah sat beside him, her own arm bandaged. The kids, Judge Carter's voice was Sarah. They're fine. They're in the waiting room. Emma and Jake were allowed and briefly. They approached the bed carefully, afraid to hurt their father. Hey, you too, Judge Carter said with a weak smile. I'm okay. Emma burst into tears. Dad, she shot you. She tried to kill you. I know, sweetheart, but I'm going to be fine. Will she go to jail? Jake asked. Yes, she will definitely go to jail. The family talked quietly for a few minutes before the nurse made the children leave. Judge Carter needed rest, but his mind was racing. 3 gunshots had changed everything. 3 months later, the trial began. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Multiple witnesses had seen the shooting. Karen had confessed to planning it. The evidence was irrefutable. District Attorney Gonzalez presented witness after witness. Mrs. Johnson testified about seeing Karen shoot Judge Carter. Tom testified about tackling her. Detective Rodriguez testified about Karen's confession. The most powerful testimony came from Judge Carter himself. He walked slowly to the witness stand, his shoulder still stiff from the injury. When I saw the gun, I knew I was in serious danger, Judge Carter said calmly. I tried to de-escalate. I tried to talk her down, but she was beyond reason. She was consumed by rage. Sarah Carter testified with tears in her eyes about watching her husband get shot and throwing herself over his body. The defense argued that Karen suffered from mental illness. A psychiatrist testified about narcissistic personality disorder and how losing control had triggered a psychological crisis. But the prosecution's cross-examination was devastating. Karen had loaded the gun the night before. She had waited for the right moment. She had approached Judge Carter deliberately. This showed planning and premeditation, not impaired judgment. Karen herself testified. I couldn't stop thinking about that garden. Consumed me. I remember feeling rage and humiliation. I remember thinking that Judge Carter had to pay. Do you regret what you did? Her attorney asked. Every single day. I destroyed my life. I hurt innocent people. If I could take it back, I would. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. We find the defendant guilty, the foreman announced. Karen gasped and covered her face with her hands. She had been found guilty on all 3 counts of attempted murder. 2 weeks later, Karen returned for sentencing. Sarah Carter gave a victim impact statement. Karen Mitchell changed our lives forever. My children have nightmares. My husband will never regain full use of his shoulder. We will carry this trauma forever. Emma spoke next. I used to love our garden. Now I can't look at it without seeing my father bleeding on the ground. Mrs. Mitchell shot our whole family. She took away our feeling of safety. Judge Carter spoke last. Karen was ill, but she was also dangerous, and she chose violence over every other option available to her. She needs treatment, but she also needs to be removed from society for a significant period of time. Karen stood and apologized. I am deeply, truly sorry for what I did. There is no excuse for my actions. I let my anger and pride turn me into someone I don't recognize. I accept whatever sentence you give me. Judge Martinez reviewed his notes and spoke. Karen Mitchell, you have been found guilty of 3 counts of attempted murder. I sentence you to 25 years in state prison. You will be eligible for parole after serving 15 years. Additionally, you will pay restitution to the Carter family for medical expenses and therapy costs. The gavel came down with a final bang. Guards took Karen away in handcuffs, beginning a sentence that would consume the next quarter of her life. The Carter family returned to Maple Street, but life would never be the same. Judge Carter returned to work after 6 weeks. His shoulder healed, though it remained stiff and painful. He had new compassion for crime victims in his courtroom. Sarah became an advocate for gun control. Emma and Jake saw therapists for over a year, gradually learning to heal from the trauma. The HOA elected Mrs. Johnson as the new president. Her first act was to eliminate most of Karen's rules. Her second act was to officially approve vegetable gardens. Within a year, half the houses on Maple Street had their own gardens. Karen's husband Bob divorced her and moved away, too ashamed to face the neighbors. The house sat empty for months before a young family bought it. Karen served her time in prison, participating in psychiatric treatment. She wrote letters of apology to the Carter family every year. Judge Carter kept the letters but didn't respond for many years. After serving 15 years, Karen was released from prison at age 65. She moved to a small town where nobody knew her story. She got a job at a community garden teaching children how to grow vegetables. One day she received a letter from Judge Carter. "Dear Karen, I am writing to tell you that I forgive you. It has taken me many years to reach this point. The shooting changed my family forever. But holding on to anger only gives you continued power over my life. I choose to let that go. I hope you have found peace. May you use your remaining years to do good in the world." Karen read the letter through tears. She had spent 15 years waiting for this moment. Forgiveness didn't erase what she had done, but it gave her permission to move forward. Judge Carter retired at age 72 after serving with distinction for over 30 years. Emma became a criminal defense lawyer. Jake owned a landscaping business designing community gardens. The trauma had shaped their lives, but it had not destroyed them. They had grown stronger, more compassionate, more determined to make the world better. Karen lived quietly until her death at age 78. Her final journal entry read, "I destroyed my life over a vegetable garden. How absurd that sounds now. Pride and control are false gods. They promise power but deliver destruction. I learned that too late. May others learn it sooner." When Judge Carter heard of Karen's death, he attended her memorial service. Karen Mitchell made terrible choices that hurt many people, but she spent her final years trying to make amends. That doesn't erase what she did, but it shows that change is possible. The story of Karen Mitchell and Judge Carter became a teaching case across the country. It illustrated how small conflicts could escalate into violence when mixed with mental illness, poor communication, and access to weapons. Maple Street remained peaceful and safe, but the residents never forgot what had happened. They remembered that beneath the surface of any community lurked the potential for conflict. Most importantly, they learned that it wasn't rules or authority or control that made a community strong. It was kindness, compassion, and the willingness to treat others with dignity and respect. The vegetable garden that started it all still grew in the Carter backyard, tended by Judge Carter's grandchildren. Every harvest reminded the family of how far they had come from that terrible Saturday morning when 3 gunshots changed everything. 5 years after the shooting, Maple Street had become something entirely different from what Karen Mitchell had tried to create. The neighborhood that once lived in fear of violation notices and fines had transformed into a model of community cooperation and support. Mrs. Johnson's leadership style was the opposite of Karen's. Instead of sending threatening letters, she knocked on doors with cookies. Instead of demanding compliance, she asked for input. Instead of rules, she promoted guidelines based on respect and common sense. The neighborhood garden program that started with Judge Carter's vegetable patch had expanded dramatically. Nearly every house now had some kind of garden. Some grew vegetables, others grew flowers, and some had herb gardens. The children of Maple Street formed a garden club that met every Saturday morning. Young Emma Carter, now 18 and preparing for college, led the garden club. She taught younger children the same lessons her father had taught her, though the memories were still painful. Every time she showed a child how to plant a tomato seedling, she remembered that terrible morning. But she chose to honor the good memories rather than let the bad ones consume her. Jake Carter, now 16, had started a business mowing lawns and maintaining gardens for elderly neighbors. He employed 3 other teenagers and donated 10% of their earnings to a gun violence prevention charity in his mother's name. What Karen had meant for evil, the Carter children had turned into something positive. Sarah Carter's advocacy work had grown beyond anyone's expectations. She traveled to schools across the state, speaking to students about conflict resolution and the dangers of unchecked anger. Her message was simple but powerful. Words can hurt, but bullets destroy forever. Karen Mitchell was not a monster, Sarah would tell her audiences. She was a woman who let her need for control poison her mind until she couldn't think clearly. She had access to a gun when she should have had access to therapy. That's a failure of our society, not just her personal failure. Sarah's speeches were often followed by moments of silence as students processed her words. Many young people came up to her afterward, sharing their own struggles with anger or telling her about family members who needed help. Judge Carter himself had become a different kind of judge. The shooting had changed how he viewed the people who appeared before him. He understood now in a way he never had before, how quickly a life could spiral out of control. When defendants stood before him charged with crimes of passion or rage, he saw Karen Mitchell. When victims testified about trauma and fear, he saw his own family. This didn't make him soft on crime, but it made him more thoughtful about sentencing and more willing to recommend treatment alongside punishment. He started a program in his courthouse called Second Chances. It allowed first-time offenders with mental health issues to receive treatment instead of jail time, provided they completed the program and stayed out of trouble. The program had a 70% success rate, far better than traditional incarceration. Inside the women's state prison, Karen Mitchell was living a life she could never have imagined. The woman who once ruled a neighborhood with expensive clothes and a sharp tongue now wore a gray uniform and worked in the prison laundry. The first year was the hardest. Karen struggled with the loss of her freedom, her status, and her identity. She had been somebody on Maple Street. In prison, she was just another inmate, a number, a person who had committed a terrible crime. But the mandatory psychiatric treatment began to break through her defensive walls. Dr. Sarah Chun, the prison psychiatrist, met with Karen twice a week for the first 2 years. "Tell me about the garden," Dr. Chun said during one early session. "It was just vegetables," Karen said dismissively. "I don't even know why it bothered me so much." "But it did bother you. Why?" Karen was silent for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "Because he said no to me. Nobody ever said no to me. I was the HOA president. I made the rules. When Judge Carter refused to obey, it felt like my entire world was crumbling. Your sense of self was based on control." "Yes," Karen whispered. "If I wasn't in control, then who was I?" Over months and years of therapy, Karen began to understand the narcissistic patterns that had governed her life. She learned that her father's impossibly high standards had created a woman who needed constant validation through power and control. She learned that her outward confidence had masked deep insecurity. The breakthrough came in her 3rd year of incarceration. Karen was working in the prison garden, a program that taught inmates agricultural skills. As she knelt in the dirt planting tomato seedlings, the irony struck her so hard she began to laugh and cry at the same time. "I shot a man over a vegetable garden," she said to the inmate working beside her. "And now I'm growing vegetables in prison. God has a sense of humor." The other inmate, a woman named Rosa, who was serving time for assault, looked at Karen with sympathy. "At least you can see it now. That's more than most people here can do." Karen joined a victim empathy group inside the prison. Once a month, victims of various crimes came to speak to inmates about how those crimes had affected their lives. Karen heard from people who had been shot, stabbed, beaten, and traumatized. Each story reminded her of what she had done to the Carter family. She began writing letters to Judge Carter and his family. The first letters were stilted and defensive, still making excuses. But as the years passed and the therapy continued, the letters became more honest and heartfelt. "Dear Emma," one letter read, "You were 13 when I shot your father in front of you. I was so consumed by my own rage that I didn't think about what witnessing violence would do to a child. I destroyed your sense of safety. I made you afraid in your own backyard. There are no words adequate to express my sorrow. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that I see now what I did to you and I am truly sorry. Karen sent similar letters to Jake, to Sarah, and each year on the anniversary of the shooting to Judge Carter himself. She never received responses, but she kept writing. It was part of her healing process. In her 10th year of incarceration, Karen received a surprise. She was called to the visiting room and told she had a visitor. She assumed it was her attorney with paperwork for her upcoming parole hearing. Instead, she found Emma Carter sitting on the other side of the glass partition. Karen's hands shook as she picked up the phone. Emma, now 23 years old and in her 2nd year of law school, looked so much older than the frightened 13-year-old who had watched her father get shot. "Hello, Mrs. Mitchell," Emma said. Her voice was steady, but not cold. "Emma," Karen breathed. "I never expected. Why are you here?" "I'm studying restorative justice in law school," Emma explained. "It's a process where victims and offenders meet to discuss the crime and its impact. My professor suggested I might benefit from meeting you if I felt ready. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I decided to try." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "I've written you so many letters. I know. I've read every one." "I'm so sorry," Karen said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you, to your family. You were just a child." "I know you're sorry," Emma said. "I can see it in your letters. That's part of why I came. I needed to see if your remorse was real or just words on paper." "It's real," Karen insisted. "Every day I wake up and remember what I did. Every day I wish I could go back and make different choices, but I can't. All I can do is try to be a better person now." Emma nodded slowly. "I've spent 10 years angry at you, angry and afraid. I've had nightmares. I've been in therapy. I've struggled to trust people. What you did changed the trajectory of my entire life." "I know," Karen said quietly, "but holding on to that anger was poisoning me." Emma continued. "My therapist helped me understand that forgiveness isn't about you. It's about me. It's about releasing the hold you have on my life." Karen was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "You don't owe me forgiveness." "I'm not doing it for you," Emma said firmly. "I'm doing it for me. I'm here to tell you that I forgive you, Mrs. Mitchell. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." The two women sat in silence for a moment, both crying. Then Emma spoke again. "I want you to know something else. I'm going to be a lawyer because of what happened. I want to help people resolve conflicts before they escalate to violence. I want to reform the criminal justice system so it focuses on rehabilitation instead of just punishment. In a strange way, your crime gave me purpose." Karen nodded, unable to speak through her tears. "I hope you find peace too," Emma said. "I hope when you get out of here, you use your experience to help others. Don't let my father's suffering be for nothing." Emma stood up to leave. Karen pressed her hand against the glass. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me as human." Emma pressed her hand against the glass from the other side. "We're all human, Mrs. Mitchell. That's the lesson in all of this. We're all capable of terrible things when we lose sight of our humanity. But we're also all capable of growth and change." After Emma left, Karen returned to her cell and wept for hours. But these were different tears. They were tears of gratitude and hope, not just shame and regret. After serving 15 years, Karen appeared before the parole board. She was 65 years old now, her hair completely gray, her face lined with age and regret. The hearing room was small and austere. 3 parole board members sat behind a long table. Judge Carter sat in the gallery along with Sarah. Emma had offered to come, but Judge Carter told her it wasn't necessary. The board chairman reviewed Karen's file. "Ms. Mitchell, you've been a model prisoner. You've completed all required therapy. You've participated in victim empathy programs. You've worked in the prison garden and taught other inmates. Your behavior has been exemplary." "Thank you," Karen said quietly. "However, you committed a very serious crime. You shot 3 people, including a sitting judge. Why should we release you?" Karen took a deep breath. "I can't undo what I did. I can't give Judge Carter back his full shoulder mobility. I can't give his children back their innocence. I can't give Sarah back her sense of safety. Those things are gone forever because of my actions. But I am not the same woman who fired those shots. That woman was sick, consumed by pride and the need for control. I've spent 15 years in therapy learning to understand what drove me to such violence. I've learned that my value as a person doesn't come from having power over others. If you release me, I won't go back to Maple Street. I won't seek any position of authority. I want to work with at-risk youth, teaching them about anger management and the consequences of letting rage control their actions. I want my story to be a warning to others. The board members conferred quietly. Then the chairman spoke. We're going to grant parole with conditions. You will remain under supervision for 5 years. You will continue therapy. You will perform 200 hours of community service annually. And you will have no contact with the Carter family unless they initiate it. I understand. Karen said, "Thank you for this chance." As Karen was let out, she looked at Judge Carter one last time. He nodded slightly, not with forgiveness, but with acknowledgement. They would never be friends. They would never return to being neighbors. But they could both move forward now. Karen was released from prison 2 weeks later. She moved to a small town 2 hours away where a halfway house had agreed to take her. She got a job at a community garden and began volunteering at a youth center. At the youth center, she met troubled teenagers who reminded her of herself at that age. Kids who needed control, who covered insecurity with aggression, who didn't know how to handle being told no. "I want to tell you my story," Karen would say to these kids. "I want to tell you about how I destroyed my life over a vegetable garden." The kids would laugh at first, thinking she was joking. But as Karen told her story, showing them news articles and court documents, they fell silent. "I was just like you," she told a 16-year-old boy who had been arrested for assault. "I couldn't handle anyone challenging my authority. I let my anger control me, and I ended up in prison for 15 years. 15 years. I lost everything over pride and the inability to walk away from a conflict." Some kids listened, some didn't, but enough of them heard the message that Karen felt her suffering had meaning. If even one teenager learned to control their anger because of her story, then perhaps some good had come from all the evil she had caused. Back on Maple Street, life continued peacefully. Judge Carter had fully retired now at 72. He and Sarah spent their days with grandchildren, tending their garden and supporting their children's important work. The house where Karen Mitchell had lived was now home to a wonderful family who knew nothing of its dark history. Their children played in the backyard where Karen had once paced with rage. Their laughter had replaced her anger. On quiet evenings, Judge Carter would sit on his porch and reflect on everything that had happened. The shooting had been the worst day of his life, but it had also taught him profound lessons about justice, mercy, and the human capacity for change. He pulled out Emma's latest letter and read it again. She was graduating from law school at the top of her class. She had accepted a position with a nonprofit that provided legal services to mentally ill defendants. His daughter had taken trauma and turned it into purpose. Jake's landscaping business was thriving. He had started a program that hired formerly incarcerated people and taught them job skills. His mother's advocacy work had led to new state legislation requiring better mental health screening for gun purchases. From terrible violence had come meaningful change. That was the real ending to the story of Maple Street. Not that evil was defeated, but that good people had refused to let evil have the final word. 25 years after the shooting, Judge Carter stood in his backyard on a warm spring morning. He was 77 now, moving slower but still sharp-minded. The garden had been replanted dozens of times over the years, each generation adding their own touch. His granddaughter Sophie, Emma's daughter, was planting tomato seeds in the same spot where her grandfather had been shot all those years ago. She was 8 years old and knew the story. Simplified and age-appropriate, but she knew. "Grandpa, why did the mean lady shoot you?" Sophie asked innocently. Judge Carter knelt beside her, his old shoulder aching from the movement. She was very sick in her mind. "Sweetheart," she forgot that people are more important than rules. She forgot that gardens are meant to bring joy, not anger. Did she ever say sorry? Yes, many times. And your mother forgave her. Was that hard? Judge Carter smiled. Very hard. Forgiveness is one of the hardest things humans can do, but it's also one of the most important. When we forgive, we set ourselves free. Sophie thought about this as she patted dirt around a seedling. I'm glad you didn't die, Grandpa. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. That afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Karen Mitchell, now 90 years old and living in a nursing home. Her handwriting was shaky, but readable. Dear Judge Carter, I am writing what will likely be my final letter to you. The doctors say I don't have much time left. I want to thank you for the grace you showed me, even when I deserve none. I want to thank Emma for her forgiveness, which changed my life. I spent my final 3 years trying to prevent other angry people from making my mistakes. I helped over 200 young people learn to control their anger. I like to think that saved lives. Thank you for giving me the chance to do something good with what remained of my life. With eternal gratitude and remorse, Karen Mitchell. Judge Carter folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box with all the others. Then he returned to the garden where his granddaughter was working. The spring sun warm on his face, grateful for every moment of the life that Karen's bullets had almost taken away. Justice was served, truth prevailed, healing happened, and life, always resilient and hopeful, went on.